The paddock at the Lusail International Circuit in Qatar is usually a place of calculated silence before a season begins, but in early 2026, that silence was replaced by a deafening roar of anticipation. For years, one name had haunted the dreams of MotoGP team managers, Toprak Razgatlioglu, the Stoppie King, the man who had fundamentally changed the physics of what was possible on a production-based superbike. After 3 world titles and a golden season with BMW that defied the laws of probability, the Turkish sensation had finally crossed the border. He didn't just walk into the premier class. He arrived with the weight of an entire nation and the ego of a champion who had forgotten how it felt to lose. Joining the Pramac Yamaha project was supposed to be the final piece of the puzzle, the most talented rider in the world finally meeting the most sophisticated prototype machinery on Earth. The hype was staggering. Fans expected him to be the next Marc Marquez, a rider who could bypass the learning curve and start hunting for podiums immediately. But as Toprak zipped up his new leathers, trading his iconic number 54 for the number 7, a shadow was looming over the garage. A technical ghost that no amount of raw talent could easily exorcise. No one inside the paddock truly expected what would unfold during those first weeks of testing. Behind the smiles and the flashing cameras of the team launch, a reality was setting in that would change everything for him, his team, and the entire narrative of the 2026 season. The Yamaha M1 V4 is a masterpiece of engineering, a screaming 280 horsepower prototype that costs more than most small-town budgets. When Toprak first threw a leg over the bike during the private tests in January, the initial feedback was pure adrenaline. He marveled at the seamless gearbox, a system so smooth it felt like the bike was constantly pulling him into the future. He spoke about the small joy of the acceleration, a level of power he had never experienced even on his championship-winning BMW. For the first few laps, the optimism was infectious. The Pramac crew, led by veteran mechanics who had seen the likes of Jorge Martin and Jack Miller, watched the telemetry with bated breath. Toprak's entry speeds were already impressive. His ability to manipulate the chassis under heavy braking was exactly what they had hoped for. But as the sun began to set over the Sepang International Circuit in Malaysia, the data began to tell a different story. Beneath the surface-level speed, something was fundamentally wrong. Toprak was fighting the bike, not riding it. The aggression that had made him a god in World Superbike was suddenly acting like a virus inside the Yamaha's ECU. The optimism of the first morning began to evaporate, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Toprak looked at his crew chief, the man who was supposed to guide him through this transition, and for the first time in years, the Turkish rider didn't have an answer. The beast of Iwata was being tamed, but not by Toprak. It was being neutered by a component most fans never even think about. In the world of elite motorcycle racing, everything begins and ends with 2 small patches of rubber, each no larger than a credit card. For years, Toprak had been the undisputed master of Pirelli tires. In the superbike world, Pirellis are known for being communicative and progressive. They give the rider a warning, they whisper when they are about to slide, allowing a rider like Toprak to use the rear of the bike like a rudder to steer through a corner. But MotoGP is a Michelin world, and the Michelin paradox is brutal. The Michelin tires used in the premier class are digital, they are either on or they are off. They offer a level of grip that is scientifically superior to anything else on the planet, but they demand a level of smoothness that was the direct opposite of Toprak's DNA. Inside the garage, whispers began spreading among the engineers. Toprak was trying to V-style the corners, braking late, squaring off the turn, and snapping the throttle open. In Superbike, this resulted in a beautiful, controlled power slide. In MotoGP, it resulted in a catastrophe of physics. The Michelin rear tire didn't just slide, it entered a state of uncontrollable overspin. According to insiders, the telemetry showed that Toprak was spinning the rear wheel so violently that the traction control was cutting power just when he needed it most. He was effectively fighting a ghost. He would open the throttle, the tire would lose its mind, and the bike would refuse to move forward. Yet the real turning point happened away from the cameras, in a closed-door debrief where the technical reality finally hit home. Toprak wasn't just learning a new bike, he was being forced to delete his own muscle memory. The stopwatch in MotoGP is the most honest and cruelest judge in sports. As the official preseason tests at Sepang and Bararam progressed, the gap began to widen. While riders like Alex Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia were consistently dipping into the record-breaking territory, Toprak was stuck. He was finishing sessions 1.9, sometimes 2.1 seconds behind the leaders. In a sport where 0.2 of a second can be the difference between a front-row start and a mid-pack disaster, a 2-second gap is an eternity. It is a lifetime. The pressure began to build fast. The Turkish media, accustomed to seeing their hero win every weekend, started asking difficult questions. The paddock aliens, the established stars who had spent their whole lives on prototypes, began to watch Toprak with a mix of pity and skepticism. Some mechanics from rival teams claimed something felt off in the way he was approaching the limit. Rumors suggested deeper tension behind closed doors at Pramac. Was the M1 too difficult? Or was the rider simply too superbike for the world of MotoGP? The technical analysis was simple but devastating. Toprak was trying to use his trademark trail braking to settle the front, but the Michelin front slick was so sensitive that his aggressive input was causing the tire to tuck or lose its profile shape. He was slow because he was too fast with his hands, too fast with his feet, and too fast with his heart. He was almost 2 seconds off the pace, and for a man who had dominated the world for the last half-decade, this was a psychological collapse in slow motion. But what the paddock discovered next shocked everyone. Inside the Pramac garage, the dynamic between Toprak and his teammate, the veteran Jack Miller, became a central drama of the season. Miller, a man who had ridden Ducatis, KTMs, and Yamahas, understood the Michelin secret. He tried to act as a mentor, showing Toprak the data overlays. The difference was stark. Where Miller was rolling through the corner with a U-style line, maintaining a smooth, high corner speed, Toprak was stopping the bike dead. The tension became palpable during the midday heat in Bararam. Toprak admitted openly to the press that he was having to ride like a middleweight, a direct reference to the Moto2 style where you have to be excruciatingly gradual with the throttle. For a rider known as the most spectacular braker in history, this felt like being a concert pianist told he could only use 3 keys. It was a mental cage. The psychological pressure was mounting. Reports suggested that Toprak was becoming increasingly frustrated with the electronic settings, believing the traction control was too intrusive. But the engineers countered with a hard truth. If they turned the electronics down, the Michelin tires would be destroyed in 3 laps. He was trapped between his instinct and the reality of the rubber. Yet this was only the beginning of a far bigger storm, because as the first race in Qatar loomed, the narrative shifted from how many races will Toprak win to will Toprak even finish in the points. The season-opening rounds were a blur of struggle and setbacks, a safe way of saying Toprak was crashing more than he was competing. But then came the Grand Prix of the Americas in Austin, Texas. COTA is a track of 20 corners, many of them requiring extreme technical precision. It should have been Toprak's graveyard. Instead, it became his classroom. The twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely. Rather than trying to beat the Michelin tires, Toprak stopped fighting. During the long practice sessions, he tucked in behind Fabio Quartararo, the master of the Yamaha flow. He watched how Fabio didn't snap the throttle. He didn't fight the rear. For the first time, Toprak didn't look for the spectacular entry. He looked for the exit. He finished the race in the points, a modest achievement for a 3-time world champion but a monumental breakthrough for a MotoGP rookie. He had finally cracked the code. 2026 wasn't a year of trophies. It was a massive data-gathering mission. Some insiders claimed that Toprak's late race pace in Texas was actually on par with the top 6. The Stoppie King was learning to be the flow king. But what happened after that left even his closest team members stunned. As the circus moved back to Europe, the narrative around Toprak Razgatlioglu shifted. He was no longer the superbike intruder failing to adapt. He was a pioneer undergoing a total character transformation. The 2026 season was never about winning the title on a satellite Yamaha. It was about the 2027 regulation change, the move to 850cc engines where the power-to-grip ratio would change again. Toprak and his mentor Kenan Sofuoglu had played a masterstroke. By entering in 2026 and struggling through the Michelin wall now, Toprak would be the most prepared rider on the grid when the new era began. He had been humbled, yes. He had been 2 seconds off the pace, yes. But a humbled Toprak is a rider with nothing to lose and everything to prove. He didn't come to MotoGP to be another statistic. He came to prove that a rider can unlearn their soul and rebuild it in the image of a new machine. The journey was never going to be easy, and the scars of those first tests at Sepang will remain. But as the lights go out for each new race, the paddock no longer looks at the gap on the stopwatch. They look at the rider. Because they know that once Toprak Razgatlioglu masters the secret of the Michelin tires, the rest of the grid won't just be racing a champion. They'll be racing a man who has already survived his own collapse. And that is the most dangerous rival of all.